The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Foust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfoust.com.
So life, as you know, can be tough. There are times when we're beset with really, really strong emotions that can overwhelm us. And that's a little bit of what I'd like to talk about tonight. From our retreat, we just had our week-long fall retreat, which was very powerful and lots of amazing transformations going on. It's just beautiful to serve the retreats and in giving talks and doing interviews with people practicing, and their stories are just amazing of what happens when you really settle the mind and what organically arises to be seen and acknowledged and ultimately to be let go. There's one story one teacher shared from the retreat that I just loved. Something she mentioned that she saw on Facebook. She said that there are times when we have really, really difficult times in our lives, and what we really want is someone to say, "I'm sorry, let me hug you. Here's some chocolate and $6 million. You know that feeling when you're just lost and overwhelmed and feeling just bereft? What I'd like to talk about are really exploring 4 questions in the 35 minutes I have here. The first is, what is it that pulls us away from the present moment, and how do we come back? The second is, what is an emotion, actually? And the third, how do you unpack or unwind difficult emotions when they arise through this lens of Buddhist psychology? And fourth, in the context of all the emotions we feel and the challenges that we have, is happiness possible? I shared this story on retreat. When I was 13, my sister got married, and she and her husband, they're both geologists, they had this great idea for their honeymoon of doing an 11-day wilderness canoeing adventure in the National Boundary Waters canoe area. And it sounded so cool that my parents and his parents, my aunt and uncle, and my brother and I decided to go with them. So, so we had this amazing journey, 11 days in the wilderness. We only saw 2 people the whole time, just as we were coming back. And much of the time was just amazing being out in the middle of the wilderness, right on the border of Minnesota and Canada. But there was one section in there where it rained for 4 solid days. And we had our itinerary. We needed to keep going. This is back in the day of canvas tents. Have you ever used a canvas tent? You touch a canvas tent when it's wet and suddenly everything's wet. And old funky sleeping bags, and the tents were wet, our sleeping bags were wet, our clothes were wet. We were cooking with wood. The wood was wet. It was cold and windy. And I remember being in the bow of the canoe and crossing some really rough lakes, and the lake water splashing over the gunnels and it feeling warm, compared to the air temperature. And I was about as miserable as you can get. At one point, we were trying to get a fire going, and it was really hard, as you can imagine. And I was 13 years old, a skinny little 13-year-old, and I was wearing jeans. You know what it's like when you're wearing wet jeans, You move, and there's a whole new section of material that freezes you. So I looked at my father, and I said, if I had an anvil, I would tie it around my neck, and I'd throw it in that lake. And my father gave me a look I had never seen before. And he never talked about his war experience. But I knew he had been in World War II. And I remember being at 6 or 7, looking at a book of these photographs from the war. And I was looking at this one photo of of this guy crouched down talking into a radio with this ruined church and smoking ruins in the background. And my dad just happened to walk by, and he said, "That's me." And I looked up, and he said, "Yeah, the photographer had me pose for that photograph." I found out later, years later, that my father had been wounded twice, had been missing in action, and had been through a horrific experience of World War II. So when I looked at him, I said, if I had an anvil, I'd tie it around my neck and throw it in that lake. The look he gave me, he looked right through me. And he just said very quietly, he said, "Hey, no one's shooting at us." That moment snapped me out of a very narcissistic 13-year-old experience, where suddenly I realized that how I was holding my experience was so tiny compared to what other people had experienced in their lives. And I've always wondered about that, about what it's like to be so caught in our tight little world and suddenly snap out of it and realize that we are connected with others who have very, very different experiences. And perhaps you've had an experience like that, where suddenly you realize there are other people out there as well that have opinions and experiences. And in many ways, that's what this practice of meditation is all about. It's about moving from your story to come in contact with reality. The practice of meditation, the Buddha's quest, if you will, was to find out what's real, what is true. So as we meditate and thoughts arise and feelings arise, we have the opportunity to look at them and ask ourselves, what is true here? What is real? The more we can establish ourselves in the present moment, the more you naturally begin to see everything that's changing. And you can begin to see into what is true in what is changing. And the Buddha said if you look closely, you'll begin to see 3 characteristics of reality. The first has to do with impermanence, that everything that is born out of causes and conditions is subject to change. Everything. Your thoughts, your moods, your emotions, this body is all subject to change. The second characteristic of reality has to do with the dissatisfaction, the unsteadiness, the stress, or the suffering we experience when we disagree with reality. When you want it to be different, you will experience some form of dissatisfaction. When you can allow, there can be a sense of freedom. The third characteristic of reality has to do with who we take ourselves to be. And we begin to see that the self that we think we are has 2 qualities. One aspect of the self is also born out of causes and conditions. Our body, our thoughts, our opinions, they're all subject to change. And yet there is what we could call an absolute self. There's something about yourself which is beyond change, which we can sense from time to time. A deep quality of allowing, a deep quality of spaciousness, the capacity to be present in the midst of all that is shifting and changing in our lives. So the Dalai Lama said something very radical. He said, the purpose of life is to be happy. It's not easy to remember that all the time because we get caught. We get caught in our physical pain, emotional pain, the mental turmoil that naturally arises. We get lost in fear and anxiety. And yet, when you look closer, it's not the awareness that's angry. It's you and the causes and conditions that are angry. And you have the capacity to be aware of that. So what is the constellation of an emotion? If we have the capacity to watch our emotions, what is it that happens where we get caught? I once had a very powerful experience of being the witness, the observer of another person's emotion. Many of you know I lived in a spiritual community for many years, for a couple decades, and had a kind of a monastic lifestyle going, and we were always needing money to keep our organization going. So I was drafted into being a fundraiser, and we would ask guests who would come to our facility, ask them to donate to the cause. And it was a very powerful experience for me to learn how to ask people for money. But there was one woman who I had asked for, we set up a meeting, if I could meet with her. She was there for, doing a program or a spiritual retreat. And we sat down, and I asked her to donate as diplomatically as I could. And she completely freaked out. Who do you think you are? I'm here for a retreat, and you're asking me for money, and she went on a tirade. And in the experience, as I was in the midst of it, I have a very strong desire to be liked. But I could see that in the midst of that, there was so much energy coming at me. And I realized this has nothing to do with me. This is more about her. And it really felt like I was, like there was just a hairdryer turned on me. And because I was so non-reactive, I could sort of sit. And after about a minute and a half of this like vicious tirade, it was over. And then she began to talk about, first of all, she was embarrassed, but she began to talk about how exhausted she was and how tired she was, and how she had always come to our ashram for relaxation, and she was needing it so badly. And over time, she expressed her gratitude for my willingness to sit there as she let that emotion flow out of her. And we actually got very close through that. It's very interesting to see. There are a couple of things about that I didn't realize then, but I kind of learned later. There was some study that said that a pure emotion is about 90 seconds. That if you experience a strong emotion and you give it sort of unrestricted space, it lasts about 90 seconds. I have no idea how they timed that. I have no idea if that's really true, but it's kind of a neat idea. And someone smart wrote that down. And I've really seen that actually, as I've sort of applied that in my own life, it seems about right. That if I feel a strong emotion of grief, when my beloved dog died, my best buddy of 15 years, there was such a feeling of loss. And of course, grief comes in rogue waves. It just comes out of nowhere. And I made a conscious decision that when a wave of grief would arise, that my practice was to stay on the wave until it was gone. And it was a very, very powerful experience, because what I saw was that I was able to move as I rode that wave. On the other side of the wave would oftentimes be just a feeling of pure love, a feeling of pure presence. It's been said that oftentimes what happens when something arises that you aren't in full agreement with, there is a clench. It begins with a clench. The Tibetans call it shempa, and that clench is something's wrong. Either something's wrong with me, or something's wrong externally, and I need to protect. We calcify around a self. And as that clench happens, there's tension that builds, and it begins as a wave. As you get more tense, the wave increases and increases, And usually what we do is we find some way to disrupt the wave. And classically what we do, we'll go into one of the 5 hindrances, the 5 obstacles. We spin off into anger. We go into judgment or blame. We kind of blow it off. Or we disassociate through going into fantasy or planning or going anywhere but what we're experiencing. Or we get lost in a cycle of worry and anxiety. Or we disconnect through, we just get tired, or we just slip into more of a depressive cycle. Or we get paralyzed by doubt or self-criticism. But if you can stay on the wave, if you can ride that wave, there's usually some form of a crisis or a peak. That might be when you feel the tears arising, or you feel the intensity of that emotion arise. On the other side of the wave, when that wave falls, sometimes it simply feels like a weather system moved through. Sometimes there might be a cognitive insight, a recognition of something you were believing, or like a really deep recognition of attachment. Oftentimes there's just this sense of feeling more clear. Something's on the other side of that wave. John Gray has kind of this oversimplified, I think it's a little oversimplified, when he talks about relationships, how usually one person will be feeling an emotion and the other person wants to jump in and fix it. And if you can allow that person to ride the wave, and he said it's just like two minutes, just hang out there for 2 minutes. On the other side will be that sense of something having passed through, or a sense of relief, a sense of intimacy that can arise. So we can learn how to practice that for ourselves. It's a little bit easier when you're in meditation, and it's a lot more challenging when you're in relationship. But nonetheless, learning how to ride that wave, how to stay with it, can be enormously helpful. The other important thing about riding a wave or riding in a strong, difficult emotion is to recognize that an emotion is a psychobiological event. It's of course happening in your mind, but it's also happening in your nervous system. And we're so trained in our culture to stay in the mind, to try to solve the problem in the mind, which has some effect. But if we can recognize that there's something going on beneath that in the realm of feeling and sensation, if we can address that, it's actually transcendent of the story. And that can be enormously powerful. So then the question becomes, what's the technology for unpacking a challenging emotion? So I think it's best illustrated through a story. And this is the story of someone who was the COO of a pretty large organization. He had 3 children, was divorced, remarried with another child on the way. And in his organization, he was in charge of all the details, making everything happen. And the president was a very entrepreneurial person, loved having new ideas, loved just coming up with new projects and new initiatives. So he was the bridge between this very entrepreneurial, let's burn it down and start over president, and trying to protect everyone and get everything done that needed to get done. In the meantime, he was navigating through this divorce and marriage and having a child on the way. And as you can imagine, his stress level was about a 9.8 on a scale of 10. And one day he was working late again and just trying to keep up with all the details he had. And he got a text from his boss saying, I have this new project I want to talk to you about. So when you're done working late, meet me at this restaurant and we can talk about it. And that was the straw that broke his back. And he sat down and wrote an email where he completely unloaded all of his resentments over the last 5 years that he had been there. It was all right there. And he decided to copy the board and the management team. Because as he was looking at it in his passion, it said it all. It just said it all, just the sickness of this culture. And he was about to hit the send, and suddenly he just froze. And he thought, wait a minute, what am I doing? And then he paused. And then he went through these classic steps that are part of kind of the technology of working with something difficult. Many of you know the technology. It's the acronym's RAIN, R-A-I-N. Something you can apply in any moment, particularly, though, when you're really caught by something. The R stands for recognizing or realizing what's happening. And so he thought, okay, well, what's happening? He said, I'm at my wit's end. I'm angry. I feel hopeless. I feel like lashing out. And I actually feel some sadness and despair. And then when he got to the despair, it's like, wow. So when you can recognize or realize what's happening, that's a very important step, because as soon as you can name it, you're actually severing a little bit of identification with it. In the shamanic traditions, they say if you can name a fear, you take its power away. So there's something about that. The A part of that acronym is to allow or accept, or to ask yourself, can I allow this? Can I accept this? And sometimes we can't. Sometimes it's too much, and it's very skillful to let it know another time when the conditions are different, you might be with it. But he thought, okay, all right, here it is. Let me make room for this. Which took him to the I, which is to investigate or be intimate with what's there. Also known as having tea with your demons. To sit down and be intimate with it. So part of his training was to move from the story to what it felt like on the inside. And he noticed that he was feeling very, very tight. He was feeling nauseous. There was a lot of acid in his stomach. He was actually trembling a little bit because the energy was so strong in his body. And as he just sat with it, really feeling it intimately on the inside, it began to shift a little bit. He began to feel a little more settled. And he began to realize that actually there were parts of this job that if he didn't have this job, that he would miss. He loved the camaraderie. He loved the people that he worked with. He also realized that this job really allowed him and gave him ease in his life. It provided enough income to take care of everyone, and that was really important to him. He actually realized that as much as his boss was kind of a pain, he loved the stimulation of and being on the cutting edge of new ideas. The N part of this equation, when you can recognize, allow, be intimate with what's there, the N stands for a sense of non-identification. You're not quite as identified. And something about the anger that he felt, it just sort of lost its grip. And he began to realize, on the other side of that wave, how much of the job he really enjoyed, to be honest and truthful about it. Then he very, very carefully turned back to his computer, deleted that email. He texted his wife and said, I'm going to be late again. And it actually, he was surprised his wife was quite accommodating. And he went to the meeting, and it turned out it was a surprise party for him. There's something about that pause that really makes a difference. You know, were you ever told, you know, before you say something, every count to 10? It really works. And there are actually some Reikian therapists would say, if you take 10 really, really full deep breaths, after 10, you'll even forget what you're angry about. So the pause is so important. That capacity to recognize, allow, to lean in rather than to push away, to actually lean in and sense, what's here? How intimately can I feel this? Not all the time there's resolution, but you get more familiar with what's actually happening. And as the Buddha said in a very beautiful way, he said, familiarity leads to wisdom. We habitually pull back, we habitually protect. When we can actually open and investigate, we become more familiar with what's true and what's real. So perhaps we can do just a little 2-minute reflection just to explore this. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might like to just to bring into mind something in your life where there's some form of challenge, maybe somewhere where you have some kind of complaint. Just something where you might feel a little bit tight. So I'll just take a few moments for you to go through the files. Perhaps something where you felt a strong emotion in the last week or so. And if you can't think of anything, you can make something up just for the purpose of this little exercise, just a few minutes. It might be helpful to take a few moments just to sort of zoom in a little bit here to kind of clarify this. If you're a visual person, can you visualize an image or maybe a moving picture, like a video clip? Can you sense who is there, the time of day? And you might explore this quality of recognize or realizing. As you sense this experience, what do you feel? What is your experience? Can you name a few words for the quality of feeling? Just to name it truthfully. What is this? And we'll explore the next few minutes with just a few questions that I'll be offering you. Is it possible over these minutes to allow or accept what is here, to make room for it? And if so, when you think about the situation, what does it feel like on the inside? Can you locate what that feels like? Is it possible to hold this feeling in some quality of compassion or empathy or kindness? And as you do so, how does it move or shift or change? Is there a sense of how this feeling or how this situation, how does it want you to be with it right now? And regarding this whole situation, what advice do you have to give yourself? And if you were to follow that, not perfectly, not all the time, But if you were to follow that, what would that feel like? What would that be like? And you might deepen your breath and let this fall away. And if you like, you can let your eyes open, or you can let them remain closed if you prefer. At the end of our half-hour meditation, I shared these two fundamental inquiries that you can ask yourself at any time. The first one, what is my experience right now? That's a very powerful question, and what it is the seed of wisdom, your capacity to recognize or name what's true. And the second inquiry, can I be with this? Can I allow this? And that question is the seed of compassion, of your capacity to allow, to make room for what is here. When you are struck with physical pain, with strong, difficult emotion, or when your mind is caught or obsessing, those two questions become very powerful. What actually is happening? And can you be with it? To recognize what is there, to ask if you can make room for it, and then only if the conditions are right, to really be intimate with it. To explore with a quality of kindness. What is this? How does this want me to be with it? Generally, with any strong emotion, underneath it is an unmet need. And if it's possible to sense into that, it will take you from blame into a deep recognition of something you were hoping for, something you were wanting that has not yet been fulfilled. And when we can do that, there can be the shift from being very identified to more of a quality of allowing. It gives us access to the Buddhi mind, to the wise, to wisdom. So much of the practice is about focusing on difficult emotions when they arise, but a whole other quality of emotion is actually about cultivating the emotions that open you into more expansive states. Sometimes this is called gladdening the mind. And perhaps one of the most effective ways to do so is to turn your attention to gratitude. I know many people who begin each meditation with a short reflection on gratitude, just to think of 3 things for which you feel grateful for. And perhaps we can try that just as a little Zen pop quiz. If you like, you can close your eyes. And let's begin with just one thing. What is one thing, one person for which you feel gratitude? And as you breathe, let your mind go there. But then if you can, also notice what felt sense forms on the inside. What does that feel like as you reflect on gratitude? And you might, if you like, only if you like, you might bring your hand to that place where you feel that. And breathe into that. Then bring into mind something else for which you feel gratitude. And as you visualize it, as you think about it again, notice the felt sense that forms. And if you like, you can let your eyes open, or you can remain with them closed. It's going to be such a skillful practice. I'm trying to think of someone's name. He's a really good friend. He wrote the book Buddha's Brain. Pardon? Of course, Rick Hansen. He talks a lot about neuroscience. And the classic saying is the neurons that fire together wire together. So when you think of something that upsets you, the more you think about it, those neurons fire together, they wire together, and you create a pattern. When you turn your attention to gratitude, or to any number of positive emotions such as joy, or serenity, or kindness, or compassion, or admiration, or enthusiasm, inspiration, enjoyment, or love, when you direct your mind toward those emotions, guess what? Those neurons fire together and they wire together. He said if you can hold your attention on something positive for 15 seconds, and if you can do that 6 times a day, over 2 weeks, you can cultivate a profound, measurable shift in your brain. So part of the practice is to learn how to address when something unpleasant arises, to learn how to be with that. But it's also about increasing your capacity for happiness. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, what's not wrong right now? No one's shooting at us. I can't tell you how many times in the middle of some crisis I would just say, hey, no one's shooting at us. It really has a profound shift. So even having just a gratitude practice, just once a day, it's quite profound how that can cultivate a shift. Then the question is happiness possible? There's more I was going to say, but I'm running out of time. But I'll just offer this. Yes. Jack Kornfield tells this great story of this monk who would come from Burma, and I guess he worked with a translator. He only spoke 2 words of English. And he was such a happy guy. And wherever he would go, he would just say, happy, happy, empty, empty. And that pretty much says it all. That happiness is a state of non-desire. Or as Werner Erhard used to say, the quickest way to be happy is to choose what you already have. It's a quality of contentment, a quality of this is enough. And it can be, again, quite a profound way to begin to shift your consciousness to practice contentment. This is fine, thank you. So why don't we close with just a short meditation. And we'll do a little reflection on this. So letting your eyes close, you might, again, maybe just take 3 conscious breaths. Breathe in fully. Relax on the exhale. Breathe in fully. And relax and feel on the exhale. You might again just reflect on something you're grateful for. And hold that feeling as your anchor. Letting this moment be just as it is. Nothing to add, nothing to take away. You might bring into mind those who are in your inner circle, those to whom your love and affection flows most easily, and in your own way, wish them well. Feel them happy, at peace, safe. And just for a few moments, you might let that offering flood out in all directions to all beings without discrimination. May all feel happy, at peace and safe. And as you offer it out, offer it to yourself, to this breath, and to each cell of your body. And again, deepening your breath, letting your eyes open. Thank you for your kind attention. Just a few brief announcements. If you'd like to be on the mailing list, you can sign up in the back. As always, thanks for your generous support for the church and me and my lavish lifestyle. And in November, I think on the 11th, I'm going to be doing a day-long retreat. It's called Dynamic Meditation. It's kind of a pretty radical form of meditation, kind of informed through the yogic practices. It's has kind of a cathartic movement quality to it and goes into very, very deep stillness. It's interesting stuff. That's happening. And as we've been exploring all kinds of emotions, happiness is unconditional. The real practice of happiness is to be able to experience that sense of joy regardless of the externals. However, there are some conditional things that really do make a difference, and one of them is cookies. And they're out there in the lobby waiting for you. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. I'll see you next week.